G'day guys, welcome back to Lessons from the Legends. In this one we're taking a little bit of a break from our lessons from the 100 greatest fighters of all time to bring you the 10 greatest fighters of all time and explain to you why the man who most people believe is the greatest fighter of all time, pound for pound, Sugar Ray Robinson, is not on my list. Granted, he's pretty much number 11, so he's very close. But essentially, Sugar Ray Robinson came into the lightweight division as a tall, long, lanky lightweight. Typically would circle around the outside, use his jab to dominate his opponents with his speed and reach, and would wear down his opponents. He also had great cardio. If you did hit him, he had a fantastic chin. He was very hard to hurt, and he essentially dominated and swept through the lightweight division. Then moved up to welterweight as he got a bit bigger and it got a bit too hard to cut down to lightweight. Also had some great wars at welterweight. Welterweight is where you start seeing he had some trouble with some guys. He definitely fought some very tough opponents around this time too, as far as like Jake LaMotta. He fought him 6 times and beat him every single time except for once. Jake LaMotta once joked that he fought Sugar Ray so many times he got diabetes. But yeah, Jake was always known for being the opposite to Ray. Super aggressive. He would come forward and just maul you to death, whereas Ray would actually float and move and sting you from the outside with his jab. And then the thing with Ray Robinson, though, that's great is that he has that kind of outside style where he would dance and use his footwork to be very evasive and flick out the jabs. But if he got into a firefight and if he was stuck in the pocket, or if he wanted to just bang on, he would. He was absolutely savage. He was basically Muhammad Ali, but with more of a killer instinct. He also had a fantastic chin, like I said. And this is where he got a few of his, I think, best wins of his career during his welterweight run, because he beat a guy named Kid Gavilan twice, who Kid Gavilan is easily in my top 100 pound-for-pound boxers of all time. He's a great Cuban boxer, and in my opinion, the best Cuban boxer of all time, who moved into the professional ranks. This is where he got, most of his wins over Jake LaMotta as well, who was a very tough middleweight. Jake is probably just outside my top 100, but not far outside at all. And then he moved up to middleweight as well, and that got a bit hard to make welterweight. At this point, he's just under 6 foot tall, so he is very tall for his weight division, and even at middleweight, he's still fairly tall and fairly long. But this is where he started having more more challenges. He's facing bigger, tougher, more durable opponents who have more of a comparable reach to him as well. So he actually became a 5-time middleweight champion because he kept on losing the title, but then he would win it back in the rematch. This kept on happening over and over again through the second part of his career. So basically, it's from the very early 40s to the mid 50s is where Ray it's a very, very long career. He has great longevity, Ray Robinson. And another thing that people always, I think, look to with Ray is that he was a jack of all trades. He had everything you could possibly want as a boxer. There's a lot of the guys who I'm going to talk about in the top list are really extraordinary at a couple of things, and then not as good at other things. So they have a very more one-dimensional sort of style, whereas Ray could be anything in the ring. He'd throw any punch. He could knock you out with any punch he wanted to. He was an absolute master of all, but not an absolute A+ in anything. He was, and that's the thing that sort of I think held him back from the reason why I don't have him in my top 10 of all time. He doesn't have an amazing performance or amazing victory over someone who is either really, really good, like a top 50 pound-for-pound all-time great, except for very early in his career, he fought a guy named Henry Armstrong, but Armstrong at that point, who is pretty much in everyone's top 5 of all time, but Armstrong was kind of past it at that point, and there's he doesn't have any victories over anyone who was significantly bigger than he was. You can definitely say early in his career, someone like Jake LaMotta, for instance, outweighed him quite a bit, but Ray still had the height and reach advantage. So with that, I tend to put a lot of credence in the guys who are shorter, have shorter arms, whereas Ray, he did try to go up to light heavyweight to win that title against Joey Maxim, who was not necessarily an all-time great light heavyweight, but his resume is spectacular. He's fought everyone, and he's a very, very tough fighter. Ray was winning on points, but then the referee passed out due to the heat, and Ray had to quit very late in the fight because of the heat as well. So very, very tough conditions to fight. Anyway, I'll definitely go into these fighters more if you guys do want them in the future, but that's my rundown of Ray Robinson. Who's ahead of him? So let's go through it. In order, in reverse order, we'll kick it off with Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather. I like to put these guys in together because I think they're very much tied in conjunction with each other. For a long time, this was the big fight they were going to make, Mayweather versus Pacquiao. Mayweather basically was very similar to Robinson. He ran through the lightweight division, went up to welterweight, ran through the welterweight division. I'd say with Floyd, though, he's more dominant. Ray has more wins over top opponents, but when Floyd fought top opponents, which he did fight a lot in his career as well, he dominated. He really, really dominated a lot of them. There was a guy, Marcus Maidana, who definitely gave him a lot of issues through a lot of dirty boxing. He was a phenomenally underrated fighter. Ray also went up and fought a few guys who were fairly good size advantage over him in guys like Canelo Alvarez, who was fairly early in his career but was still very, very good. He was definitely a guy who was at the time junior middleweight, but really he kind of became a middleweight. And as we speak right now is more of a middleweight. Then we've got also previously in his career defeated Oscar De La Hoya. But yeah, Mayweather is known for being very dominant, and he is an incredibly evasive fighter, one of the greatest defensive boxers of all time. Very good at the dirty boxing too, which is the clinch work. So he was very good at hitting and then clinching up, and then when he let go of the clinch, he'd hit you on the way out as well. Had an amazing body jab. He could hit you with a jab to the body from seemingly way over the other side of the ring. It was amazing. His footwork's phenomenal. His evasion and use of the Philly shell or stonewall guard, which is essentially where you have your lead hand down and then use your lead shoulder to cover up the bottom half of your face and roll with punches, was fantastic. He would often be able to evade punches and then come back with the right hand. So yeah, Floyd was phenomenal. Manny Pacquiao, the other one. So Manny Pacquiao, naturally a little bit smaller than Floyd. He started off being known as the Mexicutioner. Pacquiao was from the Philippines, and he would run through a lot of Mexican legends, especially Erik Morales and Marco Antonio Barrera. So he beat them. Then he fought another guy named Juan Manuel Marquez, who did not have the reputation of the other two guys, but another top Mexican fighter. And he knocked down Marquez 3 times in the first round. And then after that, of the next 3 fights, it was completely even. Like, Pacquiao had finally met his match in Juan Manuel Marquez. You see in boxing history, there's a lot of these great rivalries which go through like 2 or 3 or even sometimes 4 fights. If you go way back in the day, it sometimes goes through a lot more as well. And Pacquiao ended up having 3 incredibly close fights with Juan Manuel Marquez. And then finally, later in their career, he looked phenomenal. He looked like he was about to knock out Marquez for the first time. He knocked down Marquez, and then the master counterboxer, Marquez, knocked out Pacquiao in vicious fashion, slipped to the outside of his punch and just nailed him with a brilliant counter and ended up knocking out Pacquiao. He fell flat on his face. But Manny Pacquiao is a bit more of a giant killer than Floyd Mayweather, being a smaller fighter. Even when he fought Floyd, he got beaten fairly convincingly by Floyd, but you can always say that Manny was a little bit smaller than Floyd anyway. And Manny was also a southpaw, which makes it very interesting. So Manny he fought with the left hand as the rear hand and right hand forward, and he was very, very good at doing things that southpaws shouldn't be able to do, which is not just taking the outside foot position and throwing the left hand down the middle, but he was really good at throwing throwing his jab as well from the southpaw position, which is very rare if guys have opposite stances, because he was so damn quick. Manny Pacquiao, lots of speed, lots of power, and had a lot of really cool moves that like southpaws usually just can't pull off, but due to his speed and his ability to pivot really quickly, he would land a lot of shots where he would actually have inside foot position and still throw the jab, and he had a lot of really cool moves like that. Delving into the rest of the top 10 now, we've got terrible Terry McGovern, who was a bantamweight back in the day. Pound for pound, one of the greatest knockout punchers of all time. This is a guy we've already talked about on the channel. There's a couple of guys who will come up who we've already talked about on the channel. But just be very quick. Absolutely tore through the bantamweight and featherweight division, knocking out everyone. Absolutely beat the hell out of a legendary featherweight when he went up a class in George Dixon, and then went up again to take on Joe Gans, and in one of the most impressive performances of all time, defeated the much bigger, also all-time great Joe Gans, who was the reigning lightweight champion at the time, by a second-round knockout, thanks to his immense body punches, especially with the smaller gloves back then. We're talking like early 1900s. So they had much smaller gloves, and they did a lot of damage, especially to the body. And that's, for me, is one of the 5 most impressive wins in boxing history, is the Terry McGovern Joe Gans knockout win. Absolutely phenomenal. Through that short amount of time, he's pound for pound as good as anyone who has ever lived, but he did only reign for a short amount of time. Guys like Pacquiao and Mayweather have a lot more longevity. Robinson have a lot more longevity, but due to McGovern's peak, I usually put him in the top 10 as well. Then we get into Rocky Marciano. So Rocky Marciano, he's mainly up there because he is naturally a lot smaller than Sugar Ray Robinson, but at the same time, Robinson was winning and losing and winning and losing the middleweight title. Rocky was dominating the heavyweight division and beating everyone who was available to him. There were not a huge amount of really big punchers who were the top guys. It was more technically brilliant boxers who Marciano was beating, and granted, they weren't that big either. A lot of guys who are pretty much all 6 foot tall. You kind of had an over the hill Joe Louis who he knocked out, and then the next best fighters he fought obviously after that were Jersey Joe Walcott, 6 foot tall, not particularly big, but a masterful boxer. Definitely look forward to talking about him later on. Ezzard Charles, who will also be in this list, again beat Ezzard Charles twice, just like he beat Walcott twice. And often the second fight between them was when the vicious knockout came. He viciously knocked out Walcott in both their fights, but the first one was he had to really overcome a lot of adversity. He was down on points and then came back and hit Walcott with what a lot of people believe is the hardest punch ever thrown in boxing. One of the most horrid knockouts you'll ever see, especially from a guy in round 13, not a guy who was fighting in round 1, and he knocked out Walcott and sent him into another orbit after being down on points to this masterful boxer. In the rematch, he knocked out Walcott in like a minute. It was very, very quick. And then he moved on, obviously, to Ezzard Charles. Beat Charles over a decision, but in the second fight, he got his nose split straight down the middle. And then the referee was like, hey, I would stop it because you're bleeding everywhere. You're bleeding buckets of blood, but it's you. So just because it's you, I'm going to let it go one more round. You got to knock him out. And Rocky did knock out one of the greatest boxers of all time in Ezzard Charles. And then finally, Archie Moore, who is a phenomenal, who regarded as one of the greatest light heavyweights of all time. Again, 6 foot tall, not a big guy, but a masterful boxer. Archie Moore is probably my answer. Actually, no, number 2. The second most intelligent boxer of all time, in my opinion. Behind another guy we're going to talk about soon in the video. But again, was knocked down early by Archie Moore, just like he was knocked out early by Jersey Joe Walcott in their very first fight, but came back to wear down Archie Moore and then retired quite early. So he retired undefeated, like Floyd Mayweather did. Fought all the best fighters who were available to him. But yeah, mostly in there just because if you've ever boxed, you realise how valuable it is to have longer arms. And Rocky has weirdly short arms. Practically all the top boxers in history always have a longer reach than their height. Practically everyone. But with Rocky, much shorter arms than his height. And his height was he's still only 5'10". So he's still very short. So absolutely amazing. And Rocky was known as one of the most untechnical boxers of all time who have been successful. He was hard as nails and super duper fit and threw really, really hard punches. Rocky is not a technical boxer at all. He was very good at like creeping forward, and then slipping to the outside of your jab, and then once you'd overextend with the jab, then he would lunge forward with the right hand and leap up with the left hook. That was his typical sort of move. But if all else fails, he would just hit you in the biceps, hit you in the shoulder, hit you in the hips, hit you in the legs. He'd hit you on the top of your feet if he could, hit you on the top of the head. Like he would just, if all else fails, he would just throw punches after punches after punches. And now getting into one of his opponents and one guy who he beat during that run when he was heavyweight champion before he retired as the undefeated heavyweight champion was Ezzard Charles. Now, Ezzard Charles is a guy who came from originally the middleweight division and then gradually went up to light heavyweight and went up finally to heavyweight, where he did win the heavyweight title before Rocky Marciano came along. He won it in 1950 from the longest reigning heavyweight champion of all time, Joe Louis, and was champion for a few years before being knocked out by Jersey Joe Walcott, who we just mentioned. And then obviously they worked his way back to getting another shot at the heavyweight title. Lost both those both those to Rocky Marciano, but again, Ezzard Charles, very similar to Sugar Ray Robinson, sort of like had a really, really good run at 3 weight classes. And his resume to me is even better than Ray Robinson's. He's got 3 wins over Archie Moore, who again for me is a top 50 all-time pound-for-pound boxer. And frankly, most people have him higher than that. I think most people probably have him in the top 20 at least. Me, I don't rate Archie quite as high, even though I love him. I love his style so much. And then, yeah, he's just got a lot of really good wins. Even as a much smaller fighter, he beat a great African-American heavyweight named Elmer Ray a couple of times too. His resume is phenomenal. He's got wins over... There was a group of fighters known as the Black Murderers Row back then. There were a bunch of brilliantly genius black fighters who were more defensive sort of styles, so they weren't as fun to watch, and they also were just so good, people just avoided them. So, and Ezzard Charles was the king of the Black Murderers Row. He was the one who beat them all, and then the others would sort of like exchange wins over each other. You know, the Charlie Burley, Holman Williams, Archie Moore was one of them. Yeah, there's a lot of great... Lloyd Marshall was very fun. He's almost like a modern day... He was almost like a Roy Jones Jr. Had this, crazy left hook, which was really fast and really fun fighter to watch. But yeah, Ezzard Charles, 3 weight classes. He was very, very good at all 3, and the only guy who really was able to beat him consistently was Rocky Marciano. Even Jersey Joe Walcott, they traded victories with each other. So yeah, very impressive with Ezzard Charles there. Another guy, even going a little bit further back, Mickey Walker. So Mickey Walker, Ezzard Charles went from middleweight to light heavyweight to heavyweight. Mickey Walker went from welterweight to middleweight to light heavyweight to heavyweight. But unlike Ezzard Charles, he did not win the heavyweight title. He fought for the heavyweight title twice, gave a very good account of himself, almost won it when he took on Max Schmeling, but he knocked down a few times. And he also scored a draw against Jack Sharkey, who at that time, not long ago, had been the previous heavyweight champion of the world. So, yeah, Mickey Walker was immensely strong. Even when he was a heavyweight, he weighed the same amount as a middleweight. He was not very tall. He was about 5'7" on a tall day. So he was nicknamed the Toy Bulldog because he was like always the smaller guy in the ring, but he would just go after his opponents. Very similar to Rocky Marciano. He got there through determination, cardio, and being a powerhouse and being very, very tough. But yeah, not that dominant at his own weight class, although he was welterweight champion and middleweight champion for a while. But yeah, very, very good at beating the top guys, and that's what gets him in here. It's sort of like the opposite of like a Floyd Mayweather, who reigned very well against guys his own size, but whereas Mickey Walker did not. He was definitely not that dominant, but he was very good against the bigger guys, and he has a lot of good wins over even just top heavyweights at the time as well. Then we move on to another of our top 10 fighters of all time. Now we get to Henry Armstrong, another giant killer. This guy started off at featherweight. He's also like Rocky Marciano in that he's known for having incredible cardio. There was a thing where like Henry Armstrong had a heart 3 times the size of a normal... I think that's greatly exaggerated, but he had a bigger heart than most human beings. It was found during his autopsy after his death. And yeah, Henry Armstrong was just an absolute killer at featherweight. Ran through that division, including having an amazing feud with a Mexican fighter named Baby Arizmendi, who was almost like the early great Mexican warrior. And Arizmendi and Armstrong found their match with each other. They had a lot of classic fights together. Armstrong won most of them, dominated the featherweight division. Before then, jumping up to the welterweight division, which the welterweight division had quite an amazing run there. They had three incredible fighters. There was one American-Irish immigrant, there was one American-Italian immigrant, and one Jewish fighter from America. And these three guys became like the three guys. They would all fight each other in like a round-robin style. All fought each other multiple times. All the fights were for the most part, very, very close. And it was this real battle to see who would come out on top each time. And they kind of traded the welterweight title around each other. Until a little guy from the featherweight division came up and destroyed the one who emerged victorious. The one who emerged victorious at the end of the day was Barney Ross, the Jewish fighter, who was a brilliant sort of like circling boxer, great jab, great left hand. Didn't throw his right much, but had an amazing lead hand, and he would basically evade and just punish you with that. Didn't get many knockouts, won a lot of decisions, but also was incredibly tough. He was made of wood. He was so tough, Barney Ross. And Henry Armstrong was the first man to actually properly beat him. Barney Ross had suffered a couple of losses, but they were very close decisions. This was Henry Armstrong battered Barney Ross into a pulp. And it is rumoured, and I'm pretty sure it's almost been confirmed by both the guys and anyone else who was there, that Barney Ross just basically said, "I'm done, champ." And Henry Armstrong basically replied, "It's okay, just move around, I'll make it look good." So Henry Armstrong basically refused to sort of knock out Barney Ross or hurt him even more, and Barney then retired after that fight. Henry Armstrong taking on much bigger guys at welterweight, which of course is 2 weight classes up from featherweight. And yeah, had a lot of success. Had a few big battles with a guy named Fritzi Zivic, who was a hard as nails Croatian. And he was much bigger and a pretty dirty fighter as well. Very, very tough. Hit really hard. And he would end up sort of like getting a few wins over Henry Armstrong. And there's a fun sort of thing where like the guys who were able to beat Armstrong in the bigger weight classes later on took on a young emerging Sugar Ray Robinson. And Sugar Ray Robinson almost became the man who avenged his hero and beat these guys beat all the guys that Henry Armstrong couldn't. It was very, very cool. It's a cool little story arc. Before he finally beat Henry himself as well on the way up through the lightweight division. But Henry Armstrong just a relentless. He would just pin his head into your chest and just swing and just keep throwing punches. Very, very good at throwing an overhand right as well when he was really close to you. So he would just give you no room to breathe. It was very, very tough. Then we move into the absolute top of the list for me, which is Roberto Duran is the first one we'll start off with. So Roberto Duran has some of the most impressive wins in boxing history against some of the bigger guys. He was very similar to Henry Armstrong, absolutely savage, probably had a little bit more knockout power than Henry Armstrong, and for me, the smartest boxer ever. There's more techniques you can learn from Roberto Duran than anyone else I've ever seen in boxing. The guy comes closest is Archie Moore, who I mentioned earlier. But Roberto Duran, just incredible inside boxer. Another guy who, again, would get in nice and close, would pressure you and just throw a lot of combinations and eventually wear you down. His nickname was Hands of Stone, which is one of the greatest nicknames in boxing history. And he ran through the lightweight division through the 70s before taking on an absolute phenom at welterweight. He moved up to take on Sugar Ray Leonard, who was the next iteration of the Sugar Rays who came about with Sugar Ray Robinson. Again, very similar to Sugar Ray Robinson, he was a guy who was a great outside boxer with a phenomenal jab that he would flick out. And then later on, he would prove just how tough he was, how good he was at actually like going after an opponent and getting that knockout he needed. But in the first fight, he wasn't able to do it. He got outboxed from the outside. Every time Ray Leonard would jab, Duran was too good at slipping to the outside and jabbing him back. And that forced Leonard to then fight on the inside and crowd Duran. He actually had more success there than he did on the outside, but he still managed to... But Duran still got the win, still won almost every round, I'd say. And then Duran, obviously, he did lose the rematch. He had a year or two where he was not very good, but then he kind of got himself back into the game after suffering, a couple of losses to guys who really weren't in his league, and then getting viciously knocked out by one of the greatest pound-for-pound knockout artists of all time in Thomas Hearns at welterweight. But that's where you start seeing him having a lot of success against bigger guys. He got a draw against Marvin Hagler, who was one of the greatest middleweights of all time, and a long-reigning middleweight champion at that time. And he has a couple of wins over guys who were much bigger than he was, very good boxers in Davey Moore and Irene Barkley, that I rate as like some of the greatest performances ever, based on how big they were and how much bigger they are than Duran. Speaking of defeating bigger guys, Alexander Usyk, the current world heavyweight champion, again a southpaw like Manny Pacquiao, so that means that it is very, very difficult to land the jab when you have a southpaw versus an orthodox opponent, so the right hand becomes a bit more important. But as far as guys who have beaten bigger men than themselves, who are also world class, Usyk is right up there, almost unparalleled, with 2 wins over Tyson Fury, 2 wins over Anthony Joshua, and now 2 wins over Daniel Dubois. All big, dangerous heavyweights in different ways. All some of the best heavyweights in the world too. You probably make the argument they are the 3 best heavyweights in the world behind Usyk. But despite the size difference, Usyk has beaten them thoroughly every time. And this is coming after a very long, successful amateur career and a long run as the dominant cruiserweight champion in the world as well. So Alexander Usyk definitely deserves to be on this list again, because his best wins are much better than any of Sugar Ray Robinson's best wins, in my opinion. I think Sugar Ray Robinson's best wins are probably against Kid Gavilan in his welterweight run, for instance. Probably his most impressive wins, because they were early. Both fights were early, were pretty close, but then he kind of ran away with it. So they're both pretty dominant, like one-sided victories, even though they were just by decision, against a world-class opponent. Although Ray was a little bit bigger than Gavilan. Gavilan was also a guy who started at lightweight and went up to welterweight. So that's probably for me the most impressive wins of Ray Robinson's career, even though his longevity is phenomenal. And yeah, he could do it all in the ring, but we're looking at guys, every guy in the top 10 has much more impressive victories, in my opinion, than Ray Robinson does. And now we get to the top 3, which all 3 deserve their own video. Muhammad Ali, greatest heavyweight of all time, in my opinion. Essentially, it's what happens when someone is just so much faster than his opponents. He doesn't have to worry about setting up shots, and he doesn't have to worry about really keeping his hands up, because his head movement, his footwork is so good, he's not going to get hit. And he punches you so quick that you're going to get hit even if he goes straight to the head. He doesn't even have to go to the body at all to set up the head shots, to bring your guard down. He just goes straight to the head and hits you. What do you do against that? I mean, that's never really happened much where someone could consistently do that against all their top world-class opponents, but Ali did it repeatedly. Absolutely amazing. Ali, I'll leave Ali because obviously a lot of people probably know about him already. He's arguably the most famous boxer of all time, arguably the most famous sports person of all time, along with someone like Mike Tyson as well. But yeah, Ali just had an initial run in the 60s where he was just dominant. His speed just allowed him to dominate everyone. Then he had his boxing license revoked due to his protest against the Vietnam War, and then 3.5 years later he came back against very strong opposition. This is known as the greatest era ever in the heavyweight division, is the early 70s. And he had a run where he had a lot of classic fights. The competition were now a little bit closer to him. Ali didn't have the same speed, but this is where you really start to see that Muhammad Ali could take a punch better than anyone else in the upper echelon of boxing history. There's a couple other guys who had like amazing chins as well and were very tough, but Ali is absolutely made of granite, and having that sort of hand speed as well, mixed with his just cardio and his resilience and toughness. Yeah, it was a combination that led him to more heavyweight championship runs in the 70s as well, and emerging as the best heavyweight in 2 decades back to back, in the 60s and then in the 70s as well, which is very impressive. Then we move into the top 2, going back old school, 2 guys we've already talked about on the podcast here during our lessons, with Sam Langford and Harry Greb. These 2 guys are 2 of the most consistently greatest giant killers in boxing history, in my opinion. Both guys were natural sort of middleweights, but they beat every top middleweight there was, every top light heavyweight there was, and almost every top heavyweight there was at the time. Really only missing, for Sam Langford, it was Jack Johnson. He never got that rematch against Jack Johnson later in his career. Got a chance to avenge his early loss. And Harry Greb never got to beat Jack Dempsey as well. Jack Dempsey was the heavyweight champion during Harry Greb's run as a top fighter, and Harry never got the shot, even though based on a sparring session the two had, he was a decent chance of winning. That's for sure. But yeah, Sam Langford was a big knockout puncher who was very similar to Roberto Duran. He was very good at slipping to the outside of the jab and countering it with his own jab and using that to bridge the gap, get on the inside, and then throw combinations. And he could knock you out with any punch. Sam Langford, incredibly resilient and just very dangerous puncher, counter puncher, and combination puncher. The man who has the most knockouts in boxing history, which is a pretty cool stat. Then you move on to Harry Greb, who was a bit like Muhammad Ali and Henry Armstrong, kind of rolled into one. Insanely quick, but also relentless with his attack, and would constantly be going after you with punches from all different types of angles. And it was all about speed with Harry Greb. He never really tried to knock you out much with any punches. He was just trying to hit you as many times as possible. And it was a brutal experience taking on Greb. And both men have fought and beaten so many guys who are bigger than they are, and so many world-class guys who are bigger than they are as well. That's why I rate them as the top two. The downside with Ali is that, unfortunately, he was about as big as anyone else was in the world of boxing. So, you're really looking at, like, the only guy who really was much bigger than Ali during his era, who was very good, was Ernie Terrell. So there's not many examples of people who are like a lot bigger than Ali, for instance, who he could have beaten. But Ali's dominance and his ability and his quality of opposition still, for me, put him in the top three. So there you go. That's all my guys who are better than Sugar Ray Robinson, in my opinion. There may have been one or two I forgot. I don't think there was, though. I think that's it. I still rate Ray Robinson really highly. I just don't think he quite had the peak and the great performances like these other fighters all had in their career. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know why I'm wrong, because I'm sure plenty of people out there would disagree. But God, it's fun talking about boxing and talking about these great fighters. And see you guys in another video, and we'll get back into lessons very soon with the 100 greatest fighters of all time and taking a lesson from each one of them as we go through all of them in chronological order. It's been good fun, and see you guys in another video.